We haven't talked about the Bengals' remaining salary cap space for quite a while. Let's talk about what they could do with that space to finish up their offseason.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show, you can always subscribe. That will make it very easy to see when we upload our content every day and keep you informed on all things Bengals with the latest and greatest. Today, for example, we're going to catch you up on the Bengals salary cap position, and a lot of people are asking about, will they sign an offensive lineman? Will they sign a corner? Will they sign a running back? What about Samaje Perine reunion? We'll talk about those possibilities. We'll also get into the punter battle that's coming this year in training camp and look for impact in year one from this year's draft class and where that's going to come from, how likely it is to occur. James, let's get started with the salary cap situation. According to overthecap.com, the Cincinnati Bengals have about $23 million in salary cap space. I'll let you know where I have that number, but Will Liu had a question about this, as we're going to do this mailbag style. The Bengals still have $20 million in salary cap space. Are they going to use it for extensions, or will they sign at least one more quality free agent like Calais Campbell, Xavier Howard, or Steve Nelson? And some others like C. Sandadista on Twitter was also wondering, will they bring in a veteran interior offensive lineman backup to compete? He's thinking of Dalton Reisner. So a lot of questions like this: corner, interior offensive lineman, running back. Where are they going to spend that money?
Well, they should spend it. And let's start here. The Bengals are going to nestle away a good amount as I come out of the hood on YouTube. And they're going to nestle a good amount of that away for Ja'Marr Chase. Might not like it. I promise you that's on their mind. And that's high on their priority list. More so than probably any veteran that they could sign. Now watch, between now and when we post this, which there is going to be a few hour gap, they'll sign someone, Jake, and make me eat my words. That doesn't mean they shouldn't, because I think they should. And of all those names that you mentioned, I think there are two that stand out that I would sign. Like if Duke Tobin called me, or Katie Blackburn called me, or heck, if Mike Brown called me and said, James, who should we sign? I would say, well, 38-year-old Calais Campbell still got some juice left. And 30-year-old, 29-year-old Xavier Howard, well, he could probably shore up that secondary. Give Lou a couple more pieces here and give yourself and they're probably 1-year deals, but give yourself two veterans that have been there, done that are looking for a ring. So those are two names. The other, when I think of running backs, would be Jerick McKinnon. I think Jerick McKinnon, someone they were open to signing last year, didn't come together. Maybe that could happen this year, but there isn't much out there running back wise. So where do I think the money will go? I think it's extensions, number one, Ja'Marr Chase, and then a much, much smaller extension for Evan Money Mac McPherson. And then after that, I think it'll trickle down to maybe an extension for one of these other veterans. I don't want to get into that today because who knows if it actually happens. But could they sign someone else? Could they bring in an external free agent? I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think it will be three like I named, but I could see them signing a corner at some point. I could see them adding one running back at some point because they didn't draft one. It wouldn't shock me if they did that.
You did not mention interior offensive line depth. They did draft Matt Lee, of course. They drafted a player that plays one interior offensive line position. Are you suggesting they're just happy with their interior offensive line depth behind their starters?
How many picks did they have in this year's draft, Jake?
I think as many as I have fingers.
All right. So they had 10 picks. We talked a decent amount. We spent a lot of time talking about, rounds 3 through 5, interior, you get that guard, center, flex. There's no way they didn't like some of those guys. There's just no way, right? Where it didn't line up. I find it very, very hard to believe where that was the case. And obviously they get Matt Lee, someone that you are really, 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 really bullish on. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's Cody Ford and Jackson Kirkland. Now, they may feel really good about Cody Ford, the guard. And if they do, Matt Lee replaces Max Sharping as your backup center potentially. And then there you go. I do wonder, do they think Amarius Mims has a little flex there? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, would I be open to adding one? Of course, I would have drafted one plus Matt Lee. But again, Duke didn't call me to hammer the point home.
It seems like they're pretty comfortable with their interior offensive line depth is what we're getting at here, even though both of us think that it would make sense to bring in a veteran piece that has a bit of a higher history of performance than what they've got. You said Jackson Kirkland. Maybe you meant Jackson Carman. Maybe you meant Jackson Kirkland. Jackson Carman also in the mix for backing up, I guess, 4 different offensive line spots. And I still think we expect Jackson Carman to be on the roster this year. But outside of that, the depth on this offensive line unit right now does leave me asking questions, even after adding Amarius Mims and Matt Lee in the draft, mostly because Lee, even if he does win the backup center job, is probably a center only with his size being just north of 300 is what he played at in college, even though he was down to 288 at the East-West Shrine Bowl. So I would be open to that, but it doesn't seem like, to me, the Bengals are the type of team that makes these moves. These are the kinds of moves that, the Baltimore Ravens make. This is a point of criticism for the Cincinnati Bengals, bringing in the high-quality, low-dollar, budget, older players that are looking for a chance to win. And those are the players we've talked about, the Calais Campbell, Xavier Howards, Steve Nelsons, Jerick McKinnons, Dalton Reisners, all these players that have been named in the mailbag that you've brought up, James. The Bengals typically don't make those moves and would like the Bengals to make those moves, but until they start doing that, it's very hard to predict that they will.
They took a couple risks in this year's draft. They went against the grain a little bit with what they do, from a character standpoint, right?
In the third round and in the third round of the draft, yes, but that's different from spending $1 million to them.
$1 million.
Look,
that's nothing,
I know how
baby.
silly it sounds, but think about that. That's what this team is. That's what this team cares about. I'm just saying what their perspective is they don't like to spend money on aging free agent depth. They haven't done it. When they do it, we'll talk about it more, I think.
And it's so worth it. This and the trade deadline thing are really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the window is his career, but you have Joe Burrow. They should be really, really good. And maybe they do change and they add someone here. They've changed a lot over the past 5 years. Would not shock me. But until they do it, to your point, we can't say, oh, well, they're going to do it. But we do remember a time. Heck, this podcast is old enough to remember a time where they did 0 in free agency. And they waited until now. It was like the 5th wave of free agency, and then they'd add like a linebacker.
Yeah.
So who knows? James Harrison, come on down. So all we're asking for is to get that level. By the way, James Harrison still could have played well for you if you had used him right. Get that level of player much, much later where you're going to get good value. So who knows? Maybe they'll do it. I'm not going to completely dismiss it. Let's keep a little hope alive.
I'm not trying to dismiss it. I'm just saying it's hard to expect it because they haven't done it. That's all. And to your point, the window is his entire career, like you said, but the window is different. It's going to be, a bay window right now, maybe a little bit of a bigger window while he's still a little bit cheaper. And then it's maybe going to get a little bit smaller, but the window's still there.
I'll be sure to let Joe know. I'll be sure to let Joe know how you feel.
It's nothing to do with Joe. It's all to do with how much money the Bengals have to spend around him. And that's why this draft is so important. Just for the record, Will did mention 20+ million in cap space. I mentioned the over the cap number. When you account for the practice squad expenses as well, that number is closer to about 15 million in real cap space that the Bengals are working with. So if they do extend one of those veterans, maybe Trey Hendrickson, maybe Ted Karras, I don't know, speculate whoever you want. Well, Trey Hendrickson wants an extension. I'm just saying it to say it. Maybe T. Higgins, they finally get over the finish line, which is maybe part of why they're reserving the money, just in case, no matter how outlandish these possibilities are, that 15 million could be eaten up somewhat by extensions for those guys and Evan McPherson.
I think I'm more likely to get signed by the Bengals than Trey Hendrickson is to get an extension.
We'll continue the conversation in this episode by shifting gears and talking about this punter battle expected in training camp. The Bengals spending some of their undrafted free agent money on a punter coming up next.
It's time to tell you about Monopoly Go, and let's take a pause for a second. We'll stop talking about how Trey Hendrickson has zero chance to get money into 2026. Well, it's not true. He does have a chance, and so do you with Monopoly Go, because Monopoly Go is a ton of fun, and you can download it Google Play, Apple right now in the App Store. And whether it's teaming up with friends, whether it's competing against friends, whether it's just playing the classic game that we all know and love, or all of the twists that Monopoly Go brings, it has something for everyone, from time tournaments to awesome prizes that you can unlock. They have cool new playing pieces that you can travel boards with. Boards are evolving all the time. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constant changing tournaments, challenges, and they have unique mini games as well, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's also timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win, or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and download it for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go.
James, a lot of folks are wondering about Austin McNamara, the Bengals undrafted free agent punter. The question comes from the Bengalorian on Twitter. Who's winning this punting battle? James, to you.
Wow, straight to me. I know you have numbers. I'm going to toss it back to you. You go ahead. You give me your thoughts on this, and then I will share what I think about Brad Robbins versus Austin McNamara.
Really throwing a wrench in the normal format here. Austin McNamara, according to the Punt Analytics, the punt runs on Twitter, was the second best punter available in this draft class. A big-legged punter that has a history of needing to be a little bit more consistent, but stylistically, or when you think about the strengths of punters, Austin McNamara's strength is open field punting, meaning you're punting from your own 20, your own 30, and you want to really flip the field. He is not a bad directional punter by any measure, but the strength of his game seems to be the open field punting ability, according to the punt runs. The punt runs also said that their top 4 punters in the 2024 class would have been ranked ahead of the top punter from 2023. So to them, the only people I know that really study punters in a great deal of depth, and if there's others out there, feel free to comment them. I think there's a YouTube channel as well.
Darren Simmons does.
Well, of course, for teams, there are employees.
But I knew you did. Of course.
Go ahead. Like, what are we doing? But
what are you doing?
The point is that they saw this as a very strong punter class. You dive into the individual numbers, and Brad Robbins last year, of course, had a pretty tough year, averaging 44 yards per punt. And Austin McNamara did have 1 year in his collegiate career where he also only averaged 44 yards per punt. The net for Austin McNamara in college, 42 yards to Brad Robbins, 40 yards last year. Similar hang time for both players between college and the NFL game. But as Brad Robbins mentioned, there is some adaptation required when going to the NFL game. Things speed up a little bit when you're punting in the NFL, and there can be an adaptation period. It's also why sometimes you see punters kind of emerge a little bit later, where they've bounced around and then they sort of figure things out later. Statistically, from a most recent year perspective, I would not rule out Austin McNamara winning this job, but he does not have the NFL experience, and he does come with a bit of inconsistency in his game, according to the punt runs. And whether the touchback issue or directional punting is a concern for this team or not, I think it'll just come down to how these players perform in camp and in the preseason. I think it is a true battle. But James, you think that Brad Robbins has perhaps a leg up here, and maybe that's just experience?
He's the favorite. I checked the James Rapien FanDuel odds. Brad Robbins is the favorite. And it's pretty simple. You mentioned it. The experience element here is huge. Now, a couple things about Austin McNamara. He looks more like Joe Burrow than he does Brad Robbins, 6'4", 210. And I don't mean physical appearance. I mean build. 6'4", 210. I mean, if he throws about 7 pounds on, he gets in that black sheep fitness training and starts training with Dak, and boom, there we go. We have a QB3 or QB4 here. He could throw a pass or two on a fake, but McNamara did hold on extra points and field goals at Texas Tech. And that's going to determine how close this battle is. Does it go down to the wire? I don't really question McNamara, the punter, and I think Brad Robbins certainly has a lot to prove there going into this year. I know he knows that firsthand. And so if McNamara comes in and does what I think the Bengals think he's capable of from a punting standpoint, well, he may have the edge there. But the other element, and honestly, quite frank, as big as important as punting is, the more important element is holding, because you have one of the best kickers in the NFL who was awesome last year, and Evan McPherson. You're going to pay him this offseason. So you want to make sure, one, that you find the right guy and give him some stability, because he's had about 52 holders in his short 3-year career. But the other element here is making sure you don't disrupt that, because it's the Cal Adamitis, Brad Robbins, Evan McPherson trio worked really well last year. And that is a huge factor. I know people hate to hear it. They want to think about the booming punts and all that, but that's a huge factor. And so when I look at Brad Robbins, the holder, he was about as good as you could imagine or expect or want. And so that's why I think it's 51%, 49% if I had to give it a percentage. And it leans just slightly towards Brad Robbins because of that. Austin McNamara may average 50+ yards per punt and just dominate in camp and also be great at holding, because he did it at Texas Tech. But until you do it, and you're right, the mechanics, some things changed. Aaron's going to get him and say, all right, this is what you have to do now. And Evan's going to want him to tweak things. Like, it's just part of it. But if he can get the holding part down, I think it will go a long way towards him winning the job. And that's what he should be working on right now. So if Austin's listening, rookie minicamps this week, I'd be working on holding just as much as anything, because that's a huge, huge factor in determining the winner of this position battle.
Mentioned the averages for just the punting yards, just straight up. Brad Robbins was 31st in the NFL last year for punters that had, at least 38 punts. And that was at 44 yards per punt. The players below him, Presley Harvin, Lou Headley. Headley was a part-timer. Presley Harvin with Pittsburgh did not keep his job. Austin McNamara only cleared that number in 3 of his college seasons. Significantly, his collegiate average 45.9 yards per punt, which would put him, 26th in the NFL or so last year, his collegiate average in general. So it's not like they've got a guy here who's averaged 48 plus, 50 plus yards per punt, which is where the top of the NFL is. Ryan Stonehouse, Brian Anger, AJ Cole, Michael Dixon, all 50 plus yards per punt. It's not like it's that kind of big leg that they've brought in with McNamara. And they didn't have that with, any punter they've had in the building in quite a long time. So whether he does have that consistency that you need, because he clearly can hit big punts. His long punt in every game in the last year for Texas Tech was over 50 yards, but it's the ability to do that on a consistent basis. And you did hit that 83-yard punt that you can find on Twitter against West Virginia at some point from his end zone to the other end zone. But the ability to do that consistently, whether it's him, whether it's Brad Robbins, and you combine the holding aspect into things, is going to be the defining factor in who wins the job. Because both players, I think, come with some consistency questions in different ways and in different parts of their game. And I think that is something that Darren Simmons is probably pretty well over at this point, James, is inconsistency from the punters.
No doubt. No doubt about it. You got to find the right one. You got to find the one that's consistent and is going to give you the precision you're looking for, the direction you're looking for, but also have the leg. And that's where McNamara certainly could show that off. I mentioned the physical attributes, his build. And so how about that? 10 minutes on the punter battle. The sad part is, Jake, this is just the beginning. Got a lot more coming on the punter battle over the next few months ahead of the 2024 NFL season. But Austin McNamara might make an impact. What other rookies could make a year one impact? That and more coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. And I mentioned the James Rapien FanDuel odds with Austin McNamara and Brad Robbins. And if you want the real odds as far as the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, well, you got to get to FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So throw $5 on the Celtics to beat the Cavaliers. Unfortunately, Cavs fans, I think that's going to happen. Once that hits, you get $150 in bonus bets. Boom. That easy. And it could be any of these NBA matchups, any of these NHL matchups, or maybe you're looking for the Reds right now to rebound. They've lost 5 straight games. They're 16-18, and they continue their homestand on Tuesday. Well, at some point, they're going to win a game, maybe as soon as Tuesday. So throw $5 on that with FanDuel. And if they win on that money line, well, guess what? You get $150 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count, whether it's NBA, NHL, or Major League Baseball with the Cincinnati Reds. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Let's talk some more about some rookies, James. Some questions that fit the theme. Where's a year one impact coming from in this draft class? Jay Bruce 1166 asking, does Amarius Mims have a real chance of winning the right tackle job? And Creased Ballmains asking, man, your Twitter names are wild. Who is the favorite at wide receiver 3? I can see a case for Charlie, Yoshi, Burton, or even Irwin. So Jermaine Burton, Amarius Mims, year one impact, either guy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you could get, I mean, it depends on Amarius, but like he could play 1,200 snaps or 1,100 snaps. He could get all of them if it goes that way. I think there's a chance for him to win the right tackle job. I don't think it's likely. Obviously, we know Trent Brown's injury history. I think Burton and Chris Jenkins right away have a role because you play more than 2 receivers. You play more than 2 defensive tackles. And so it's easier there to see the path. And so they're going to make an impact right away. Whether it's, heck, could Eric All be in the mix? I think he would be if he were healthy, but that's a question mark. There are a lot of these guys I could see making an impact right away. I think Josh Newton certainly is going to be there and taking reps on defense and special teams and all of those things. So I just went through the 5th round. Now, Amarius, it's more of about a health standpoint, or can he beat out Trent Brown and just amaze the coaching staff? Because that's what I think he would have to do. I think he'd have to blow them away in throughout this offseason program and training camp to beat out Trent Brown, assuming Trent is playing at the level we expect him to, but it's still possible. Of all of them, though, I think Chris Jenkins makes the biggest impact. I think he's ready to go. I think he's going to be a plus run defender right away and give them what they really did need, because they needed someone else that could defend the run. They were bad against it last year, even with DJ Reader. And so Sheldon Rankins, BJ Hill, Chris Jenkins, huge impact. And then, of course, Burton is going to make an impact as well right away.
Yeah, I think that the question as to whether or not Mims can win the right tackle job in camp, I think that's a pretty tough ask for Mims. And I said going into the draft that whoever they drafted 18, if it's a tackle, should be competing for the starting right tackle job. I still believe that he should be competing for the starting right tackle job. But Trent Brown, when he's motivated, when he's put together, when he's on the field, when he's healthy, is a really good player and a really unique player at his size, being bigger than Orlando Brown, being bigger than Amarius Mims. But if Mims does put it together quickly and is up to speed and is executing the way they want him to execute and understands the offense the way they need him to understand the offense and establishes that quick rapport with right guard Alex Kappa right away, there's a chance, because the ceiling is higher. He could be a better player pretty quickly if he puts all those things together. But more likely is that they go with a veteran to start, and Amarius Mims can pick up those mental pieces, get that experience over time, because I do think that the preseason rest will be invaluable for Mims. He will need those. Those will be important for his development, and he'll need a lot of them. So I think we will continue to see a lot of that throughout the offseason program and into the preseason. The other question here, James, you talked about the ability for Burton to make an impact, but you didn't address who you think is a favorite for wide receiver 3. And that's kind of part of the theme here. You got Charlie Jones, Andre Yosevach, Jermaine Burton, Trenton Irwin, all solidly in the mix there for different reasons. Do you think Burton?
Mike Gesicki.
That's a fair point. And
Like
will be
also in that mix. Like he should be mentioned because he's going to play a factor in it for sure.
no, absolutely. I mean, Gesicki will play at least a couple hundred slot snaps for this team this year as essentially a wide receiver. You might technically call it 12 personnel because he's still listed as a tight end, but he's going to eat into the slot snap rotation. And I think that's what it is that it's a rotation. And you might see all of these guys deployed in different ways. But who do you think is the leader in the James Rapien probability calculator for the most snaps, or how would you handicap most to least snaps for that group?
Yeah, it would start, obviously it would be Jamar T. And for a full season, it's going to be Jermaine. T. Higgins, once upon a time, didn't play much his first NFL game. And then by mid-game 2, he was out there and then boom, takes off. And that's how it went. And that might be that way with Jermaine Burton, and it might take more than 2 weeks, but you may see him out there for 15 snaps week 1. And Trenton Irwin out there, and Charlie Jones and Andre Yosef, all these guys getting reps. And I do think that they could, and they're confident in all of them. And so the reason I'm bullish on Burton, though, is he gives you something vertically that these other guys don't. And so as he gets more familiar with the offense, more comfortable, it shows that he can, one, win downfield still at the NFL level, but two, pick up some of the nuance of the slot snaps. That's part of it. But I will say, what if Charlie Jones comes in and shows he can be a slot and be the guy they thought he could be? Then it gets interesting too, right? So I agree with you. I think it's going to be a rotation. It isn't going to be a big 3, so to speak, yet. I think Burton could, by mid-season or a little later, start to get more and more snaps. But it's going to be a rotation where I think Burton is still the favorite for a season long to get the most snaps there, but they trust Trenton Irwin. I think there's an opportunity for Charlie Jones to show and earn that trust. And if so, heck, he may start week 1. That wouldn't shock me. Obviously, they really like Irwin and Yosevach as well on the outside. And maybe one of those guys starts that first snap and you have Chase in the slot, snap 1 of week 1. Who knows? But I do think all of these guys are going to get a real chance to play. And Burton, ultimately, I expect his talent to win out and take over by mid-year.
Yeah, you could see all of these players having different roles in different spots for different kinds of route concepts, for different routes that they're running, for different strategies in the game as far as where they're trying to attack on the field in the passing game, as far as where they are as run blockers. Which of these guys is going to be the run blocker that they trust the most? Because that is a big factor in getting on the field. As much as we talk about receiving ability for these guys, which of these players between Jones, Yosevach, Burton, Irwin is going to be the one that they default to when they want to present a mixed look on a mixed down, where it's not just a passing down? Because on a passing down, you probably want your most talented receiver out there for the most part, right? In terms of receiving ability straight up. But on the mixed downs, on the base downs, you need to have a guy that you can trust to run block, because a lot of these plays are going to be alerts or run pass options where you need guys that are able to do both, or you'll have Joe Burrow dictating traffic at the line of scrimmage. So that run blocking ability, I think, is something that we will have to watch through the preseason, because I think all these guys are going to play in the preseason, and their willingness and ability to execute and be in the right place at the right time is going to be a factor, certainly. And I just think back to when I was watching some wide receivers for the draft, and some of these guys just really did not look interested in run blocking at wide receiver. The effort was entirely lacking. So that will be a factor for sure in this rotation that we're going to see develop.
It's similar to the holding element, where it's not as big of a factor. Of course, that's half of the punter's job, but where it goes under the radar, but it's such a factor. And I'm sure there was frustration there last year. No doubt.
Oh yeah. Especially for coaches, it's a big factor, more so than for fans, no doubt.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah. And it's such a frustrating thing when you know they're capable. And so, by the way, if you're Jermaine Burton, I mentioned all the route running stuff, but you want to find another way to get on the field. If you're Charlie Jones, you want to show that you are the slot of the future, which he still could be. I know it feels weird. Like, Could we not see him be the slot of the future? If he pops this year, he could absolutely do that. So I think blocking is certainly an element that all of these guys are going to have to show, like you said.
We'll see how that plays out. Rookie minicamp later this week. And of course, we'll see how these start to develop in training camp in a few months as well. This week, though, we've got Brandon Thorne joining us in a couple of days to talk a little bit about the Bengals offensive line and their additions to that unit. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.